Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are connecting from today. Thank you so much for being part of our conversations in these Hacking HR live chats. It's been an exciting journey since the beginning of the year, putting together all these amazing and really powerful and insightful conversations that we've had with so many awesome, talented, brilliant guests that we've had in our Hacking HR live chats series. If you missed any of the previous chats that we've had, please go to our website hackinghr.io and you're going to see a link in there. It says live chats. They are not live anymore. Of course, they are recorded now, but you can click there and you will be able to see all of the conversations that we've had. Great stuff in there, a lot of amazing insights. So please just go and check it out. It's available to everybody in our Hacking HR community. For those of you connected online right now, watching this live in any of our social channels, please let us know where you are connecting from. Just put it in the chat. Just let us know, city, country, whatever else you want to say today. And if you have any questions for us during our conversation, just post it in the chat. We will be keeping an eye on the chat and trying to make sure that we sort of bring some of your questions to the conversation. Just post it in there. If you're watching this on replay, the video on our website, well, you can connect with me. You can connect with my guests at any time you want. Of course, we add their information in there as well. So I am super excited about this conversation. You have no idea. We've talked so much about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, speaking up, speaking out in the workplace against things that don't work, injustices, inequity, unfairness in the workplace. And now we're gonna have a more systematic, more methodical conversation about this with Amber, who wrote a book about say more about that and ways to sort of create this message of us being able to push for and to advocate for others and for ourselves as well in the workplace. So I am super excited about this conversation, and I'm going to bring Amber to the online stage right now. Hello, Amber. Good morning to you, or good afternoon, good evening. Where are you located, by the way? I didn't ask you this before.
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so it's morning.
Good morning to you. How are you?
Here. Thank you. Thank you. Same to you.
Well, thank you so much. Super excited about the conversation and about your book. Say more about that. And for our audience, I would love for you to share more about who you are, what you've done, why you wrote this book. So please let us know everything that you can share about Amber.
Okay, in a short snippet, I run an organization called Cabral Co. It's a boutique consulting firm. We mostly support basically businesses with their inclusion and equity focused objectives. So that can be coaching or training, or sometimes strategy building that we will help companies with. So that's what I do for work. A little bit about me. I've been working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for the last 20 years. I started out just kind of as it being a side job to my day job, and ultimately ended up running diversity strategy at Walmart. Mm-hmm. I left Walmart and ultimately stepped out to do my own thing, not knowing that I was doing that. I actually thought when I left Walmart, I was going to go to another company, and ended up starting my own. And in the last 3 years, I have written 2 books. So the first one was called Allies and Advocates. That one came out after the murder of George Floyd started a number of conversations around the world. Mm-hmm. And then a year and a half later, I wrote the one that we're here to talk about today, which is Say More About That. Because what I started to hear people say was, okay, I do want to be an ally and I understand how, and I know this is important, but I don't know what to say, or I'm uncomfortable with how to say it. And so this book was really intended to kind of be a follow-up to the allies in the world that were saying that they were interested in how to show up, but wanted to not damage their reputation or put their jobs at risk in doing so. And so that's what brought the book about.
Wow, that is fantastic. And I have so many questions for you, but I think I want to begin here because it's something that I think is in everybody's mind, especially those who know that there are inequities and injustices in their workplaces. Mm-hmm. They want to come forward. They want to become allies. They want to ask the questions. They want to do something, but they are fearful that in asking the questions, they will reveal their own ignorance about things and that they may be the subjects of what they are trying to fix. So, what do
Yes.
you say to them?
The thing about it is we all have our pieces. And so we have to be willing to ask the tough questions. We have to be willing to lean into the conversations because that's how we learn. And so if you think back to, when all of us were in, starting school or elementary school or grade school, whatever, you may call it in your part of the world, you were invited to ask questions. You
Mm,
were encouraged to showcase, hey, I need help here, right? So folks could lean in. But as we get older, we kind of tuck that away because we think that asking questions or putting ourselves in the position to reveal what we don't know makes us seem incompetent or as though,
yeah,
we don't know
yeah,
what we're doing. And we really have to get past that. And so there's even techniques in this book to help with that. If you are worried about someone perceiving you a certain way when you ask a question, you can kind of cover that with a little bit of leading language and, protect yourself. I know that I might, seem like I would know this, but I actually have a question. I'm a little nervous to ask it. Are you open to giving me a chance to just be a little bit curious
wow,
here? Right. So you kind of warm people up to the idea that, this might be an uncomfortable question for this person to ask. And
yeah,
what they do is quite naturally say, oh, no, 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 please ask what you want to know. Right. Now the dialogue can get flowing. And so this book is intended to do exactly that, like help
yeah.
people with those kind of conversation moments that can be awkward, but give you the language to kind of get through them and also deliver the point that you're trying to work on too.
Yeah. Oh, that's super powerful. Actually, the way you framed it, right? It is you don't ask the question right away. You say, hey, I'm curious about this one thing. I think it may be, a little uncomfortable, or I don't know how to ask this question. Please give me some
Great.
leeway to just ask it, right? Oh,
Yes.
that's so powerful. I'm just actually reflecting about that, and I wish I had known that before. By the way, when I asked some tough questions that may have come across as either aggressive or why didn't you do your homework before even asking me that question, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. I encourage people to do that all the time. And this also works for identity matters. There
Mm,
have been circumstances where I was the only Black woman, the only Black American woman in a room. And so, I would be nervous about asking a thing because sometimes there's a stereotype about Black women that we are too assertive. And so I
mm,
would, open with, I recognize that I'm the only Black woman in the room. And I'm hoping that this doesn't come across too assertive.
yeah,
Everyone in the room is now primed to say, oh, no, no, we're not looking for that. Right.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
I can ask my question and it doesn't do the same damage as if you just kind of blurt it out and people have those little assumptions hanging out in the background that can potentially have an impact. So there's a few ways you can navigate that, but putting a little leading language ahead of your
yeah.
curiosity usually helps a lot.
Oh, I love that. Amber, I know that a couple of the fundamentals of the way you approach these conversations are kindness and compassion, right? You want to make sure that you're creating the right space for people to push back, for people to advocate for others, for people to ask the right questions, while at the same time they are unveiling things that have to change. But
Yes.
how do you keep in balance this idea of being kind and compassionate when you're asking questions that are telling to everybody in the organization, or saying or revealing that
Mhm.
there are inequities and there are injustices and there are biases and discrimination? So it seems like a little bit sometimes, on opposite ends of the spectrum, to think about kindness and compassion while revealing these things. What can you
Yeah.
say about that?
So what I always recommend is that you kind of remind yourself that people are people. And
Mm,
so we want to treat people like treat people, and so, you want to think about the ways that you can be thoughtful and supportive and compassionate and kind, but you also have to honor your own needs, which, in the moment, maybe I need to address this inequity. I need to ask this tough question. And so the way that you can do that, well, there's lots of different techniques that you can do that with. But one of the things you can do is just make sure that you are approaching in a way where you're inviting someone along on the journey.
mm,
So instead of it's, being an accusation, like, well, you said this and it made me feel, which feels very confrontational. What you can instead do is approach with a question. Questions invite people to do what? Answer. And so if I offer a question, you are more inclined to answer, and now we can have a dialogue. So you've said something that I think, feels a little bit not quite right. My question might be the title of the book. Say more about that.
Say more about that.
So now I've invited you to a dialogue. So you get to chime in and,
Mm,
add some additional language and say more about that is great because it makes someone think about what they just said and then say, okay, what would I add? Or, ooh, maybe that was a little harsh. How can I correct this? And
yeah.
so I think it's just being thoughtful about how you can bring someone along in a conversation instead of being in a circumstance, where you are blurting something out or attacking someone or, just really focusing on what you're trying to get across. If you instead think about a way you could invite someone, I'm not sure I follow what you mean. Can you give me a little bit more
Yeah.
perspective there? Right. So now we're inviting someone to actually join in the dialogue instead of, just kind of dumping on them like, well, that was racist, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is sometimes what we do. And here's the thing, sometimes things are offensive, sometimes things
Yeah.
are, racist, and we can still address those things without having to attack the person, and it can still be done as a question. And so we leading with a question that usually will help, kind of help to get someone on board with having the conversation. The other thing is body language. So
Mm,
if you are using warm and inviting body language, people actually talk about me for doing this because I do this to people all the time in my life. And they're like, don't do that because I know what you're doing. But sometimes you can ask a really, really hard question if you just use the right body language and tone.
yeah.
And so, someone says or does something that's, potentially offensive, you can, very warmly say, no, I'm not sure that that's the best way for us to approach this. Did you consider that maybe, right? And then you can kind of go into it. But
Mm,
that tone and that warmth, people are like, they're just more inclined to respond to that. And
yeah.
so it's using that. And so I try to make sure I recommend to people that we give folks the kind of grace that we want. When we share our opinions, we try to do so gracefully. Sometimes someone shares an opinion we don't agree with, and we'll open with, yeah, that's wrong. I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I do that sometimes with like people I'm very close to. But when I'm in a conversation with someone, where I'm interacting and it could be detrimental or they could receive me the wrong way because they don't know me very well, I leave out the I disagree. I
Yeah.
instead will say, oh, I appreciate that perspective. I actually think blah, blah, blah. So I didn't have to blatantly tell you I disagree,
Yeah.
which can be a rub, but I can instead still share my opinion without kind of diminishing yours. And so I
Yeah.
try to recommend approaches like that are inviting.
Yeah, and I love, by the way, your own vulnerability in saying sometimes I do this because it's a
Yeah.
journey for all of us, right? I mean,
Yeah.
nobody has it all figured out, and even if you know what to do, I mean, there are some human, drives that is like, I don't agree with you. How dare you say that, right? And it's like,
Right.
right, no, let me not say that, and let me
Right.
go the other way. But then you have to have that level of awareness and vulnerability that you just express. So
Yeah.
I love that, right? Um, Amber, I want to sort of get your insight about this question. I feel that sometimes
Mhm.
we at work agree on so many things, but the facade of the conversation or the what we put in front of the conversation is a lot of emotions. And what ends up happening is that if you want to try to have a difficult conversation with someone and you know that you may agree on stuff with them, but all you are putting out there is, I'm angry, I'm upset, I don't like you, or I don't like this, and you start to make it personal, then
Mhm.
you lose the possibility on having a conversation because you put the emotions first. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
So here's the thing, emotions are tricky. They sneak up on
Mm,
us. And
yeah.
so I am a big fan of trying to make room for the possibility that folks need to emote. And so there's two roles that happen in a conversation at minimum. There can be many more, but there are at least two. There's the role of the person who is communicating, and there's the person who's listening to that communication. So what I try to encourage folks to do is if you are the one communicating, think about what you want to get across. Be thoughtful about what you want to land. A lot of times that will adjust our tone. That will
Mhm.
change the way we will express our emotion. We may still be really upset or angry or frustrated, but we may choose to say that instead of actually expressing it in a way that could potentially be off-putting. And so I think as a speaker, you have to be thoughtful about that. How do I want this to land? Is this person going to hear my message if I do it this
Mhm.
way? I go so far as to even think about the environment where we're having the conversation. So if I'm having the conversation one-on-one, that's a different environment than if we are perhaps in front of our team.
Yeah.
And so I try to think about all of those elements as the communicator who is ready to say, I am infuriated about this thing. What is the best way for me to get that across and still communicate that I have a feeling about it, right?
Yeah.
Now, the other side, okay, the other side is when you're the listener. When you're the listener, we have to also give people the grace to be upset.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's important too. Folks are going to get upset and they're going to have very valid reason for why they're upset. And they're going to be able to express that. And not all the time will we be able to pull that emotion back, or will they be able to pull it back? And so we want to make sure we give folks a bit of grace. Now, of course, we want to be mindful of things like, being offensive or disrespectful, or, things that can be harmful to people. But you can absolutely, as the listener, say, okay, this isn't personal. I'll give you a really simple example. I was on a trip. It was supposed to be an in and out trip. I was going to Detroit, flying back home the same day. What ends up happening is snowstorm hits Michigan. Of course, I'm from Michigan, happens all the time. My flight gets stuck. I end up stuck overnight. Now they've got to figure out how to get me back home to Atlanta. Okay. And so I have called Delta several times. I'm trying to get them on the phone. And so I end up getting on the line with a customer service person who, I'm frustrated. I've called many times. My seats are now canceled on a flight that I thought was going to get me home. So I'm on the phone while I'm also in line in the store, in the airport, trying to get a person. And so as that's happening, the person comes on and says, thank you for calling. How can I help you today? And I said, I just hope you can help me. I am entirely just overwhelmed. I really hope that I no longer live in the airport. Like, that's how frustrated I was. I felt like I reside here now. And the response I got was, well, you don't have to take it out on me.
Wow.
And I was just like, but I'm not. I'm calling for help, But this person wasn't able to give me the grace of having my emotion and dealing with my frustration. It was an immediate, well, you don't have to take it out on me. And I said, well, I'm not, but I get to express that I'm upset. And so I want to be able to do that. And so we have an honest amount of effort that we should, in conversations that we are having with people, particularly conversations we want to have, or conversations that we have to have because we're at work, where we want to make sure that we're at least giving people grace to have their emotions and not personalizing that.
Yeah.
And I think if you keep those things in mind, it makes it a little easier when a conversation gets tough to not, kind of feel like you have to bark back at someone. You can instead listen and hear, what is the actual point here that needs to be discussed?
Yeah. And I'm hearing a couple of things here, Amber, that I want to sort of re-emphasize, right? One of them is this idea of, if you know that you have to have a difficult conversation with somebody at work, I heard a little bit of, begin with the end in mind, right? What do you want to happen, right?
Yeah.
That's going to help you go through the difficulties of that conversation.
Yeah.
But then the flip side of that is what happens when you are in the moment, right? When you didn't plan that you were going to have a difficult conversation, that you needed to push back about something or advocate for you or somebody else, but you are in the moment. And I think that in the moment is just so difficult because like this person from Delta, right? He or she just responded right away. I mean, that was like automated, thinking. And we don't want that to happen in the workplace. But what happens if you are, for example, in a meeting and, somebody says an offensive remark or a microaggression or a blatant racist comment, or a discriminatory comment? How should you act, advocate, push back in that very moment?
Yeah. So in the very moment when someone does something, I immediately hold them to account for it. So if someone says something that's offensive, racist, discriminatory, whatever, I immediately say, can you elaborate on what you meant by that statement? Because I want you to have to explain it to me. I don't want to make the assumption and accuse you. I want you to have to tell me what you meant. And most of the time, folks will play it back in their head and they'll hear it. That's why the book is called Say More About That, because I use that all the time.
Wow.
Say more about that. Now you've had to play it back and go, ooh, that probably sounded like it was, discriminatory against LGBTQ folks or whatever.
Yeah.
And so people will correct the language. And here's the thing. If they do not, they will elaborate on it. And you will then have the opportunity to say, okay, my concern with what you just said is, right? Because now they've given you more information. So you can react to, this is not okay. And here is why. And so the trick in that is to make sure. I am a big fan of holding people to account. Some very close people to me are always saying, like, you always ask for receipts. So if someone says to me, Amber, you blah, 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 and I'm like, well, tell me when I did that. Can you give me an example so that I know how to correct it? And folks
Amber,
like,
you're doing it again.
I don't have it, And I'm like, so, but that's the thing. I am really serious about holding people accountable for what they say, because here's the thing about all of us communicating with each other, if we are not intentional about holding each other accountable, then we are not going to be able to ever get, anywhere. So I need to be held accountable. If Amber does something that is inappropriate, offensive, and wrong, and it happens, I apologize a lot. Okay. It has to be a part of my vocabulary because I'm going to make mistakes. Then if I'm being held to account and other folks are being held to account, the behaviors that we are trying to get folks to stop doing, suddenly we know I'm going to be held accountable for this by someone.
Yeah.
Right now, that's not happening often enough. So we get folks who do things who are not held to account. And what people do is they don't say anything,
Yeah.
right? What they do is they ultimately just say, oh, I'm just going to stop speaking to that person, or I'm not going to work with them. Well, now the behavior goes on to impact someone else. But if we make a point in our dialogues, all of them, to say, no, I'm going to be a responsible communicator, and I want you to hold me responsible for what I say. And I'm going to hold you responsible in the same way. Well, suddenly the way we communicate with each other is going to have to change.
Yeah.
Because we know that we're going to be accountable.
And we're not normalizing their wrong behaviors, right?
Exactly.
Just by calling them out right when they happen. And we know, well, we give the person the opportunity to explain him or herself.
Yes.
But then we are, all right, now we understand, but it should not be said that way. And, we shouldn't talk in that way, or, refer to each other in that way. And then we don't normalize those behaviors or those words or expressions. I think that's so powerful. And I love how I would love to be in meetings with you, by the way, because I am like, I'm in a journey myself of trying not to react too fast to things. And sometimes I get an email from somebody. It's not even, oral communication. It's a written email. And I'm like, how dare you write something like this, right? And I'm like, breathe, let me ask. And when the person responds back, I'm like, whoa, that's totally not what I thought you were trying to say.
Yes.
I thought you were trying to attack me, and it's not that. You were trying to just ask some information, blah, blah, blah. So it completely changes my vision of the person, my vision of what was going on in between, because I didn't attach my own biases, my own assumptions to what that person was trying to say, right? And I think that is so powerful. I'm glad you brought that up.
You totally can't avoid the emotions. Like, emotions are going to happen. And the other thing is, you also can't avoid making mistakes. Yeah. I make mistakes. I mispronounce names. I have, misgendered people. I have done, several things that people have received as offensive and had to retract, apologize, and move forward in a more effective fashion. And here's the thing, everybody's not going to forgive you.
Yeah.
So we have to be okay with that part. But the thing is, like, the more we are committed to being responsible communicators, meaning I'm going to do the best I can to make sure that the message I am trying to deliver gets to you in a way you can get it.
Yeah.
You are going to do the best that you can to try to hear what I'm saying and ask the questions to get to the root of the issue. If you're confused or it's not clear, the better we're going to be about moving forward, right? The burden of communication is on the relationship. I've got to do my part, and you've got to do yours too.
Absolutely. Amber, let me ask you this question, and it may be a little bit controversial, and I have my own thoughts about it as well, of course, but there are so many things that we know should be fixed and worked out better in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And the communities that are impacted by the things done poorly in the workplace are so exhausted that I've noticed a little bit of a different approach to now saying, I'm not just advocating for this. It is you, as part of the system that is creating these inequities, to also find out and educate yourself, blah, blah, blah. But the way I say it is, maybe that's true, but I will continue to push the envelope, right, to get better. What's your reaction to that idea of putting the responsibility on the people who draw some privilege out of the way the system works right now, to on themselves do the work that I think we should be pushing for? What's your reaction to that?
I think both sides have to happen. I think that, so this is one of those, I always tell people that when you're trying to be equitable, when you're trying to be inclusive, there is not a one direction. It is a multi-direction thing, just the same way that we experience in multiple directions. There are times where we are the person, that is being treated inequitably. There are times where we are the ones, distributing the inequity. And so we have to also understand that that's happening in those kinds of communications. So here's my thought. If someone's frustrated and says, no, you need to go figure it out, say, I appreciate that. I will actually go ahead and step away and find another resource. That's okay. I get to be frustrated and not want to explain it to you. And your responsibility in that moment is to say, okay, and go in a different direction. However, that is not going to be the same way everyone's going to respond.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you want to do is, if you are in the position of being the learner, or you are in the position of wanting to be the ally, or you are in the position of trying to understand a thing so that you know how to be going forward, there are places where you can get that thing without it having to feel like an attack on you. So both are true. Folks get to be frustrated with teaching. Folks get to be overwhelmed with the experience of, I am the person experiencing the burden, and now you want me to tell you about it? I don't want
Yeah.
to go through that, right? People get to have that, right?
Yeah.
That is absolutely valid. But you also still get to want to learn. And so
Yeah.
the work then becomes making space for the possibility that the person you're speaking to doesn't have the bandwidth to give you what you're looking for, but there is someone else that might. And so
Yeah.
what you can say is, sometimes I can appreciate that this isn't the right time to have this conversation with you. Is there a place I can go to get this information? Can you point me in a better
Mm.
direction? And if they're unwilling to do that, then you can move on to someone else. We live in a world, thankfully, where most of us have access to some kind of internet or research tool.
Yeah.
You can pop it in there and at least have a starting point. And
Yeah.
that starting point will lead you to whole communities of people who are eager to try to have conversations to help you get to the place. We
Yeah.
want to be really careful about burdening people who do not have the bandwidth. And
Yeah.
folks get to have that. People get to have the feeling of like, yo, I'm not doing that. Right. And so we want to give that room and not personalize their exhaustion, or sometimes my exhaustion. Right. And then the flip side of that is, we also still want to learn. So don't let that also disconnect you from going to seek out the information. That one location or source might not be the right one for you, but there is some way or someone that can help you get to get to where you're trying to get on the journey that you're on to being
Yeah.
an ally.
Now, extending a little bit this question
Mhm.
to another dimension, so to speak, right? The people who are exhausted, frustrated, overwhelmed by asking over and over and over again, please say more about that. Please say more about that. Please say more
Mhm.
about that.
Yes.
And they are not seeing the changes that they are expecting to see in society, but in this case, at work. What is your message to those people?
So there's a couple things that you can do. First, I do recommend that the same way you notice what isn't changing, you make a pointed effort to notice what is. It is
Mm.
very, very easy when you are doing particularly DEI related work. It is very easy to say, but you still do this, and this is broken, and this isn't working. And why
Yeah.
haven't we fixed that? Because the list is long,
Yeah.
it's long. And it's also the result of several hundreds of years of
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
that have gone on. And so, and so depending on where you are in the globe and what the circumstance might be, change in the way that we like it isn't always very visible. But if you are, a person who has been advocating, take a moment and give recognition to the fact that there still is change that's happened. So for myself, an example would be, prior to George Floyd's murder, I could not say racism in the workplace.
Mm.
Companies would invite me in. We could talk about bias. We could talk about unconscious bias. We could talk about inclusion. We could talk about equity. The moment I would say, well, let's make sure we talk about isms. That's a really important part of the workplace experience. Immediate. Well, can we do that without saying race?
Yeah.
Or is there a way that we can do that without talking about the politics part? Yeah, we can do that. But are we really getting to the meat of the issue if we do it that way? Right. But now folks are like, can we talk about racism? Can we talk about oppression? Can we talk about the mistreatment of the, trans community? Can we get into the discussions about, the use of pronouns? People are asking for that.
Yeah.
That change is huge, and it's
It is.
impactful, and it's made a big difference. But it's so easy to get drowned out by, right, but I am still not well represented in leadership roles. Right, but I'm still not seeing people who look like me or sound like me or speak like me or have experiences like me, getting opportunities in the workplace. Right, but I'm also struggling, to be able to get access to the same kinds of resources that people don't look like me get. Right, and so I am still seeing all of that. And so we can lose what the progress is. We have to be intentional about seeing it.
Yeah.
So if you're exhausted, take a step back. You're entitled to that experience, but make note of the things that have changed, that are better. And so lean on those. Hey, this is better. This is improved. This is different. I can actually say this now. And we can miss those things if we aren't intentional about it.
Yeah. And it's number one, the power of celebrating those wins. It's powerful to begin with, and the fact that there are so many more people talking about inclusion, diversity, equity, racism, anti-racism in organizations, which is something that me in this space didn't even hear about before the murder of George Floyd in 2020.
Right.
So even that very concept, which existed way before 2020
Yes.
became more mainstream in
Right.
organizations, right? And I think that's a reason to celebrate, even when we still acknowledge that there's a lot of work to be done. But I love this positive approach of look at all the work we get done, right? I mean, let's
Absolutely.
celebrate this part. Um,
Absolutely.
Amber, let me ask you this: when somebody at work, when they want to speak up, speak out, push back, advocate for others, what are some of the most common obstacles they deal with? And I'm gonna add a little bit of I'm gonna pepper it with a little bit of complexity to this
Okay.
question
Okay.
for younger people as well. That
Mm-hmm.
they that I think the younger generations, not I think actually, there's research about that. Younger
Yeah.
generations are more aligned with social issues, with diversity, with inclusion, but then they go to a workplace and they fear that by speaking up, they are damaging their own career opportunities in that organization. So
Yes.
obstacles, but particularly for younger people. What do you say to that?
Yes. So a couple things that I think are specific to younger people. You just said one of them, fear. Fear is
Mm,
one that everybody experiences, but
yeah,
for younger folks that are trying to grow their career, or even folks that aren't necessarily like young in age, but maybe just more junior in their career,
yeah,
fear is a big one. And that, that might, kind of sound like, oh, I am afraid to say something because I'm afraid someone will, be offended or will not understand what I'm trying to say or will impact me in some way, right? The other thing is discomfort.
yeah.
I am uncomfortable having this conversation in a workplace. I am uncomfortable of, trying to address inequitable behaviors because I'm not sure that I see, this as an organization that is open to that. So those are two that specifically will, kind of impact folks who are, younger or more junior in their careers in the workplace. And so I'll make some recommendations on the two of those, but there are a few others too. Sometimes it's understanding. Sometimes, the obstacle that people are having is I don't understand or I don't really see how folks who are, members of the disability community are having, experiencing discrimination. I don't even understand what that exactly means, right? Now that can be embarrassing. And because I don't understand it, I just don't say anything. That means I am not a participant and I am also creating an obstacle unintentionally because I'm not saying anything. I don't have an understanding. The other thing that can show up is, an accountability issue, and this can also impact younger folks as well. But it could be, I just don't think that this organization really is supportive of this.
Mm,
I don't know how to hold them accountable to what they're saying that they want in terms of equity and inclusion goals. So that can be an obstacle. I'm not sure how to get accountability going here. And then another one is time. Sometimes people say, I think that sometimes this diversity, equity, and inclusion thing takes a lot of time. And so I'm not really sure that, it's worth me investing, or, we're moving so quickly to get the work done. How can I make time to be inclusive? So those are the most common obstacles. So understanding, accountability, fear, discomfort, and time are the ones I hear the most often. Now let's talk about fear and let's talk about discomfort, because I think those are the ones that are the most common and the ones that I think people kind of say to me the most, which is like, I am afraid. To navigate fear, I usually ask people to kind of very initially say, what happens if I say nothing?
mm,
Does it get better? Does it get better? And if it doesn't get better, then the next question is, okay, well, if I choose to just say nothing at all, is someone going to be hurt by that?
mm,
Because those are different things. If I say nothing, nothing happens, but will someone be hurt if I say nothing?
mm.
Right. And so the answer for that is, oh, yeah, then someone could be hurt. Now, my next question is, well, if I do say something, even though I'm scared, will it get better? Well, the answer for that might be yes. So then is my silence worth it? The answer is going to almost be like, yo, no, it's not. It's
Yeah.
not worth it. Like, I am putting myself in a position where, because of my own fear, someone can be hurt and something could be better if I actually said something. So I'm the obstacle. I am the obstacle. And so how can I get myself out of the way? Okay. And so I encourage people to kind of think about framing it that way. Ask
Mm.
yourself, what happens if I say nothing? Okay, well, is anyone hurt if I don't say anything?
That's a powerful question to ask
Okay.
yourself.
Yeah, ask those questions. Can something get better if I do say something? And then you'll get to a point where your silence won't be worth it. And so then you'll say it. And there are lots of ways you can approach. I often ask people to start with a question. When you start with a question, you invite people to participate. I have something I would like to share. Are you all open to hearing my perspective about
Mhm.
the way this last meeting went? I'm afraid that maybe we could have caused some problems for our disability community.
Mhm.
No one in the room is going to say, no, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to
Yeah.
say, oh, wait, sure. I'd love to hear that. What did we do? What could we have done better? And so that's the thing is, taking advantage of asking yourself those questions about, that silence, that fear is causing you to have. And if it's worth it to just go ahead and push past that. And a lot of times, if you get to the place where it is, opening it with a question. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's how I recommend you address fear. Now, discomfort is a little different. All right, discomfort is a little different, and part of the reason discomfort is different is because discomfort is a circumstance that people can put us in, right? Fear is something that can kind of happen on our own, but
Yeah.
discomfort is a thing that folks can kind of put us in because we are in a concerned situation where I am afraid of how someone is going to potentially impact me if I say this thing. I am, uncomfortable with this, and so I'm going to avoid it. So it's a little bit of a different experience. And also, just as humans, we're very attached to comfort. We
Yeah.
like when things feel good. Okay. And so when they don't feel good, our tendency is to go, oh no, I'm going to avoid that. And often discomfort is indicated by, I've got this weird little feeling between my nose and my navel, right? That's tight and tickly. And so when you get that, that's an indication that you're uncomfortable. The
Yeah.
question I ask folks to, kind of query themselves with when they hit discomfort is to just say, okay, if I am going to experience this discomfort in this very moment, am I getting in the way of my own growth?
Mm.
Think about every single time that you've grown. Think back to 2020 when we were all trapped in whatever COVID circumstance you were in, right? And if you were in the US, you were trying to figure out why we had no toilet paper,
Yeah.
okay? All
Exactly.
right. So, like, just go back to that for a moment where
Wow.
you're like, I was uncomfortable. I didn't know how to manage, my kids in school and trying to Zoom all of a sudden everything. Like, you were uncomfortable. Okay. Did I grow? Did I learn some things? I did. I learned a lot of things
Yeah.
through COVID, right? Because I had to navigate this new experience. And so a lot of times when we encounter discomfort, the thing we want to remind ourselves is that it is often an opportunity for us to grow. I am uncomfortable having this conversation, but if I have this conversation, I have an opportunity to grow. I am
Yeah.
uncomfortable with addressing what's going on in this particular circumstance. But if I do it, I am giving myself an opportunity to grow. You will never grow in your
Yeah.
comfort.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is so powerful. And I love, Amber, how you, throughout our entire conversation, you have balanced both the need to keep the purpose and the goal in mind of what you're trying to do with the way you say it, with the way you approach it, right? Because even if you want to build a more equitable organization and you come forward as, everybody's race is here, you
Yeah.
won't be able to do it.
Right.
And I think that is so powerful. Amber, as we get closer to the end of our chat, I want to ask you one last question.
Mhm.
You know, in our social media at Hacking HR, we have been sharing a lot about what I call the power of ordinary people, right? The power of those who don't have authority, who
Mhm.
don't have formal quote unquote power in the organization. And all they have to do is either in their day to day interactions, create the conditions they want to create, or through their role modeling and influencing, build a better organization. So for those for the ordinary people in an organization, those who are not leaders, who don't have formal power, what's your message to them when it comes to say more about that, speaking up, pushing back, advocating for themselves and others? What's your message to those individual people at work?
So there are two things that I recommend. The first one is a little uncomfortable, but it's a tactic that I use all the time. Kind of step outside of yourself and use the perspective of the person or people that you are trying to talk to, and imagine what could be in the way. Right. So that means that if you happen to be a, pregnant woman, at that time, or if you happen to be very tall or whatever, right? Step outside of yourself and kind of remind yourself of the things that people kind of assume about
Mm,
folks like that. Now, those things may not be true for you at all, but a lot of times it helps us to have a little bit of perspective about what we are concerned about being attacked by. right?
Mm.
I am concerned that people are not going to listen to me because people do not always want to listen when it's a pregnant woman because I'm about to have a baby and have to go out on maternity leave. People do not necessarily want to listen to me because the people perceive me as very tall and they assume I am only athletic and not necessarily smart. So we can kind of like
Mm.
draw some of the things that we are a little worried about that will get in the way. Now, you don't want to project those onto people, but having awareness of it puts you at least in the position where if it comes up, you are prepared to navigate it,
Mm.
right? So there are some specific things that I know people tend to assume about me that as they come up, I am prepared to navigate. So that's the first thing. Put yourself in someone else's potential perspective. You may not be right, so we don't want to project that onto them, but we do want to prepare for the part that might rub us the wrong way,
Mm.
okay? The second thing is when you are
Mm.
going into
Wow.
conversations, try your best to have questions. Powerful questions are one of the best things you can do in any conversation. And I know I've said questions 200 times in this discussion, but I cannot emphasize it enough. I even inside of the book actually give a list of powerful questions because I recognize what we often want to do is call a thing out. You are being, this is wrong, this is unfair, you should not. But the minute you do that, especially if you are a person who's not a leader, you are, looking to others for direction and support, people will put a label on you and say you're either hard to work with or you're
Yeah.
confrontational or you're not friendly or whatever. And so what you do
Or
is you
or a contrarian.
right, or you're a contrarian, right? And so instead of that, if you walk into a space that you have full awareness of, the worst thing people might perceive about me is this. That's not who I am. I am prepared for that to be a thing.
Mm.
And then you go in and you ask the questions. you know, are you open to the possibility that that's not the best approach? Are you
Mm.
willing to consider that maybe we could do this way? Have you ever heard of an example of blah, blah, blah? Like thinking about those questions. That way, what happens is when people have their responses back to you and they slip in those little assumptions they're making about you, you're prepared for that. When they
Yeah.
go back and they have their reactions to you, you can then push back and challenge and encourage them to grow more with more questions. Questions are great because questions do not accuse anyone of anything,
Yeah.
right? But you do have to be prepared for the assumptions that people may make about you. And that's
Mm.
the hard part because we don't like to feel like we have to lean into stereotypes. We don't like the idea that people may be looking at us and making assumptions that they might about many people who may perhaps, be Black women from Detroit, right? We don't
Yeah.
like that. But if we are armed with that, it makes it so much easier for us to navigate it if it comes up. It makes it so much less likely that we're going to take offense to it because we are prepared for the assumption that folks can make. We don't like
Yeah.
that part, but it's definitely a great tool. I do want to jump in slide at one thing that
Please go
earlier
ahead.
we were talking about. One of the ways to kind of open a conversation is to kind of preface with something. And there
Yeah.
was a person in the chat who said, can we preface the conversation without using a personal label? Yes, you absolutely can. You can preface a conversation by saying something like, I'm a little bit concerned that this might be received a bit offensively. Are you open to me asking a little bit of a tough question? So it
Mm.
doesn't have to be a personal label. There are times where I've used a personal label and I'm comfortable doing that. But if you are a person who does not want to invite an opportunity for folks to have a label for you, you don't have to do that. It's entirely
Yeah.
comfort level.
And in fact, your book is about advocating for you and others.
Yes.
So that personal label becomes it doesn't make sense if you're trying to advocate for others.
Correct.
You're seeing something that may be happening
Correct.
to others, and then you remove that personal label from there.
Yes.
So thank you, by the way, for
Exactly.
addressing that question in the chat. So Amber, this is fantastic. So everybody who is tuning in right now live in any of our channels, please go and get your copy of Say More About That. Same thing for those of you who are watching the replays. Amber, this has been such a powerful, powerful conversation. And can I ask you? I don't know if you have time for maybe like one,
For sure.
like a second one, last question.
Yeah.
If there's one thing for the people who are trying to create, they are tasked with creating better, more inclusive, equitable, diverse organizations. People in HR, people in DIB.
Mm-hmm.
Those who have to know not only how to ask, say more about that, but they have to teach others how to do that as well. What's your message to them? And I'm talking now about those that are have some power now to make change happen. What's your message to them?
The thing that I think is super important is that you have to have a space where people can share. So you have to think about what is happening in an organization to get the culture to a place where conversations can actually happen. Now, some of us think we can go into a room and we can say, this is a safe space. Let's have a candid conversation. That doesn't work. What
Yeah.
you want to do instead is, if you are tasked with trying to shift an organization's culture, you want to put yourself in the position where you are inviting safe space to happen by asking how.
Yeah.
So one of the things I
Wow.
do, even with
Yeah.
my own team, is I often say, okay, what would make this space safe for you? Is
Yeah.
this a better conversation to have without me in the room because I'm the leader in the organization? Would there be a way that you can share the things that are difficult to talk about, in a fashion that, doesn't necessarily require you to reveal who you are? What's a better approach for us to be able to have some of the challenging conversations that need to happen in this organization? I know these are questions. Again, questions are great tools. So it's a matter of asking the right ones. And there are lots of
Yeah.
them in my book for that reason. But specifically, if you are leading an organization, you want to think about what has to happen to shift that culture. And one of the first things folks have to be willing to tell you is what needs to happen. So they will even tell you what needs to shift.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things we encounter, just through my business. We get to organizations and they say, oh, we need to work on our culture, but they have no idea what that even means, because no one has created an environment where folks are willing to say, well, I think we could do a better job at. No one
Yeah.
created a space where folks feel safe saying that. And so we have to get past this idea that we can just assign spaces as safe. Oh, this is a safe space. No, no. What can I do to make this space safe for you is a
Yeah.
better
Wow.
approach.
Oh, I love that. And I gotta say, this is a very real thing for HR. And by the way, I love HR, but people who know me, they know that I always say we gotta hack this thing in HR. And
Yeah.
one of the things that we need to hack in HR is not assuming that we have the answer for things or that
Yes.
we know what needs to happen. I
Yes.
love that you said, you know what? Instead of saying this is a safe space, as people, what is safe for you? You know what
Right.
safety means for you? How can we make it safe for you? Because we may find either alignment with what we thought or maybe a completely different answer of something
Yes.
that even implementing it may be less expensive from a resource perspective, right?
Right.
So even in that sense, it's a powerful question to ask. So
Yeah. And it's
uh,
good to ask it one-on-one and in teams.
yeah,
Because people also get energy from others. So if you
yeah,
ask it in your team and someone says, well, I think one of the things we could do to make it safer would be, you might be surprised how many folks
yeah,
will say, yeah, I like that idea. Right. So
yeah.
it's a great question to ask, in your one-on-one conversations, but also in conversations with teams too.
Love it. Amber, thank you so much for spending this time with me, with our community, for sharing all of your very incredible insights that I am sure have helped a lot of people connecting in here live now and those that will be watching this replay later on. So Amber, thank you so much. I
Uh-huh.
appreciate you and thank you. Please continue doing this awesome work. I can't wait for the next book to come out. I am sure you're already working on it if you worked so much in the past 3 years, writing so much and educating so many people. So thank you so much for being you and for helping us all get better and build better organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrique. You have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Stay tuned for our next Hacking HR live chats. And I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Amber, if you can say 1 second, I'll just to say goodbye. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.